It's officially tail time. 2022 is Year of the Gecko because in April, the Gex community was gifted with the closest we might ever get to Gex 4 in the form of a decades-old resurfaced demo for a game titled Gex Jr. Now before we dive into discussing Gex Jr. properly, let me give you a whistle-stop tour of the history of Gex. Gex was designed as a mascot platformer who first debuted in a self-titled game originally released for the Panasonic 3DO in 1994. The follow-up, Gex Enter the Gecko, and the third title, Gex Deep Cover Gecko, were 3D platformers in the style of Super Mario 64. Alongside this trilogy of games, there was also two spin-off Game Boy games, a Gex novel, and after the Gex series had wrapped up, a couple of Gex cameos in golf and racing games. Gex 3 released in 1999, so it's been a long time since we've been graced with a proper Gex game. Nowadays, Gex has become a bit of a meme thanks to his characterization of delivering dated pop culture zingers and innuendo-laden catchphrases. He was already a bit of a Poochie-type character, but prominent videos from the likes of Video Game Donkey and Scott the Woz have cemented Gex's status as an internet icon. I'm not trying to start anything with Donkey and co, but I'm part of the Unironic Gex fan club. I wear my Gex enthusiasm with pride, and it's with great joy that I present the story of Gex Jr. On April 2nd, a day shy of April Fool's Day, something unexpected happened. A demo of a previously unknown Gex game titled Gex Jr. found its way onto the internet. The demo, dated to January 2001, took even the most ardent Gex fans by surprise. This was no April Fool's Day joke, however. This was the real deal. Boot up the demo in an emulator and this is what you'll see. The demo contains only one incredibly short level, the Media Museum, a strange and abstract space with a kid's TV sort of vibe to it. The museum is pretty tiny and the only thing of note you can really do is collect a few soda cans. Collect them all and Gex Jr. celebrates with a little bit of air guitaring. Gex Jr. is definitely on brand for Gex because it's full of pop culture laden catchphrases that reference Star Wars, Blue's Clues, the Teletubbies and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
I'm your father, Luke.
Gex Jr. can do Gex's signature tail whip and tongue attack, but he can also fart too. A great addition, in my opinion. And that is the Gex Jr. demo. It's utterly bizarre, and it's been a well-kept secret for over 2 decades. The Gex community had no idea of its existence. So where did this strange relic come from? It was purchased by an individual called Just Zoot and documented on hiddenpalace.org. The disc was obtained along with a collection of other Eidos pre-release discs from an associate of a former employee. It wasn't stolen, hacked, leaked or otherwise. In fact, we owe a big thanks to Zoot for popping this onto the net. The disc, emblazoned with Image Builder on the front, looks to be on the verge of breaking out into some serious disc rot, and apparently was on the verge of being tossed out and lost forever. Thank goodness it's now being properly preserved. Image Builder, eh? Strange. The previous Gex games were all developed by Crystal Dynamics, who had, by 2001, been purchased by Eidos. Who are Image Builder, and how did they end up working on what could have ended up being Gex 4? Fortunately, when the news of Gex Jr. dropped on Twitter, the internet had a massive lead to follow. One Neal Bauer tweeted out about his involvement in the project. Neal, as it turns out, is a former artist and animator who worked at Image Builder. I and others in the Gex community in turn reached out to Neal, who was kind enough to field some questions I had about Gex Jr. Here's what we now know thanks to Neal. Image Builder started life as a third-party development company that helped to make assets and frameworks for educational software on Windows systems. Working on stuff like Disney's Magic Artist Studio and Scooby-Doo Jinx at the Sphinx.
Image Builder software used to be a third-party developer's third-party developer. So if you can imagine like Treyarch is a third-party developer of Activision, Image Builder was a third-party developer that would develop works for properties like let's say Creative Wonders was the premium property. That was the Creative Wonders was the one who issued the product. Then that would be passed down to maybe Palladium or another studio. We would work on, we would add our framework to those games. We worked with developers and third-party developers to create assets or attach our framework to their games.
Most of the company higher-ups had a background in education and no experience in the video game industry. Neal started at Image Builder in the mid-90s, and as a gaming enthusiast, had been working to get the company to consider developing 3D games since the dawn of the N64 and PS1 era. Neal saw the writing on the wall for the educational software industry, particularly the brand of software that Image Builder were putting out.
But we did educational software, and when I was an artist animator there, I kept trying to push them into 3D development, because when I graduated college, the first question I got from every interview was, great, you're an animator, can you do 3D? So I was trying to move them in this direction. The children's software industry was massive in the 90s. Like, that was when Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows XP, like all of that was coming out. The drive was, get these games, like these games are going to come out. There's always going to be kids to fill that void. And so we're going to just keep making money hand over fist, hand over fist. Like, we don't have to do anything else. We just have to hire artists, attach them to this framework that we've built, and make money in perpetuity indefinitely.
By 1999, Image Builder finally started taking the prospect of working on a 3D game seriously.
What educators didn't realize, though, is that what we were creating our games in, which is Flash, we were using Flash and Director, that became used by the general public, and then the internet happened, and all of the games that we were creating for $29.99, $49.99, they're now free, and there's a million of them. So our competition became the internet, and it wasn't another console, or it wasn't another developer. It was the internet and all these kids developing games. It was Newgrounds, and it's like, oh, we're doomed. But had we moved into that general direction, had people listened at that level, we would be, I don't know if we'd still be around, we would have been absorbed into somebody at this point.
Armed with a PlayStation dev kit, Image Builder formulated a plan to build a tech demo, resume piece, or MVP to show to publishers, including Eidos, that illustrated that Image Builder were a dev company capable of taking on a 3D video game project.
They wanted to compete. They wanted to get into games, but they were developing PlayStation games on a Yarouza in '99. That's when the Dreamcast came out. So they were already a console generation behind. So what do? They can't ask for a development kit. They were hard to come by. So they wind up using the Yarouza to put together a demo for Gex. Putting a demo together to reach out to Eidos.
So why was Gex chosen as the intellectual property for this resume piece? Neal shared quite a few reasons. For starters, many people at the company were fans of Gex and Dana Gould, who voiced Gex in the older games. Second, because of the massive popularity of platformer games at the turn of the millennium. Also, Gex was a pre-established IP. He seemed like a safe bet to base a demo around. Third, the previous Gex games were written by an ex-Simpsons writer, so a Gex project had the potential to open the door up to working with talented writers.
I was a big fan of Gex when it first released on the 3DO. Big fan of Dana Gould, big fan of Crystal Dynamics. The animators at the time were fans of Gex, right? It's a 3D platformer. What was accurate, what was crazy is Image Builder was behind the times, but they saw 3D platformers as going to be the next big thing because, of course, Super Mario 64, you got Spyro, you got all that. But again, the PlayStation 2 era was 3D platformer central. Ratchet and Clank, you've got Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper. The amount of 2D or 3D platformers in that era was through the roof. So Gex was a great way to kind of show off to Eidos what they were capable of. Gex was voiced by Dana Gould, and when was it Gex 3? Gex 3 was written by one of the showrunners for The Simpsons at the time. So the whole idea behind doing something like a Gex Jr. would be to open the door to work with another professional writer. So I would think that we would want to stay in this because, listen, Eidos was at a place where they were hemorrhaging money at the same time. You don't want to give them a risky title. You want to you don't want to reinvent that title for them because it could be super risky, but you want to what our hope is to get another Gex game out there, whether it be us who created it or somebody else created it, gives them that here's a demo. If they create it, great. That's the way the artists are thinking. It wouldn't have been an educational title, but a platform title geared to an 8 to 12 audience initially, right? Like we're dealing with that demographic. We would have been trying to put together something that shows that we could work with a teen title, something like Sly Cooper. It was meant to show a minimum viable product to Eidos or Crystal Dynamics. Image Builder only had a PS1 development unit. We created a Gex game with basic features to get attention of the publisher in the hopes of getting a full game funded. Basically a resume piece to attract new publishers to Image Builder as a developer. The chances are that we actually rolled this out to other publishers, this demo. So Eidos is one, but we probably rolled this out to a couple just to show like, hey, we're looking for work.
Now, obviously, the pitch demo didn't work out. Gex Jr. wasn't picked up by Eidos, and it didn't really raise Image Builder's profile. As a company, they were far too antiquated, and this demo was too little, too late to break into 3D gaming, Neal postulates.
And I knew that was coming, so I told Image Builder, you got to get into that. And they didn't. They said, there's always going to be children's software. There's always going to be a need. There's always going to be children. And I'm like, yes, 100% agree. But the technology is advancing and people are going to be looking for that. There's no 7 or 8 year old who's a 2D enthusiast for life. They want to see the next thing. They want to see like Shrek in 3D, right? So the problem was that Image Builder was a little too late to act on developing 3D games.
You got to keep in mind it was a demo developed on a PlayStation 1 development kit at a time when consoles like the GameCube and PlayStation 2 were just on the horizon. Ultimately then, the primary motive of the demo wasn't necessarily to pitch Gex 4, nor a spin-off Gex Jr. game. It was designed as a resume piece to pitch Image Builder to publishers. If Eidos did like the demo enough to take on Image Builder as developers of a future Gex game, then great, they'd already made a start.
It wasn't like we were pitching Gex Jr., but if they wanted to do it, there it is. We've already started development on it. You can put it in a magazine. Get it in Next Generation and Game Fan.
Having said that though, Image Builder did have some unrealized ideas for a wider Gex game. You see, Neal also shared a treatment.
Here's the story. After Gex, this is the treatment that I put together. This is a treatment. So a treatment is basically your, you would come to the table as a developer. You come to the table with it's like a writer's room. Here's a concept. Here's a treatment. This is what I'm proposing for the full story. This is how I'm proposing the story transitions to each other. It's basically a workshop of a game.
The treatment adds a little bit of extra background context and story to the Gex Jr. demo. The story goes a little like this. Following on from his victory at the end of Gex 3, a depressed Gex ponders his own existence before being unwittingly sucked back into the media dimension once more after accidentally stepping on a remote control. Gex wakes up in a holiday-themed area and is greeted by a snowman. This is pretty big. The skeletal story, as thin as it is, follows on from Gex 3, so in a sense, Gex Jr. is a glimpse into what a possible Gex 4 might have looked like. One very important question remains: is Gex Jr. Gex's son? The answer is no. It's simply Gex in a kind of kids TV, Rugrats style area. Remember, in the old games, Gex would change his outfit based on the different television channels he entered. Gex Jr. is kind of like that, with Gex entering into a kids TV channel. In the 90s, stuff like A Pup Named Scooby-Doo and Tiny Toon Adventures were very popular. I see the Gex Jr. demo as a parody of that style of cartoon.
Gex Jr., the idea could have been just like one level, and so the treatment that I provided was much bigger. Like if it was a Gex 4, Gex Jr. would be the level, would be like Nick Jr. or Nickelodeon or Disney Jr. or some lower, like where he would just go into a channel and it would be all younger and he would be younger, right?
It's worth mentioning though that Gex having a son isn't as preposterous as it sounds. Gex was a suave individual and got a little tail time with some human ladies at the end of Gex 2 and Gex 3. The kid-centric demo threw a lot of people off. Apparently some sort of edutainment copyright was filed in the 90s by Crystal Dynamics for Gex, but Gex Jr. would have been a traditional Gex game and not an edutainment experience. Here's two final things to note about the demo. Gex's voice is done by illustrator Thomas Webb, doing a Dana Gould impression. If the Gex Jr. demo would have been picked up, the idea would have been to have Gould reprise his role as Gex, but as it stands, Webb will go down with greats like Gould, Billy West, Leslie Phillips, and Danny John Jules as one of the voices of Gex. And the face on the screen in a demo? It's the face of program manager Rick Lowe, who also worked at Image Builder at the time. Now, while we're on the topic of Gex, and for the sake of completeness, I wanted to share some more Gex headlines from the past year, and a few noteworthy bits and bobs that I missed in my original video chronicling the history of the Gecko. So here's some rapid-fire Gex facts. There is another aborted Gex 4 plan that I didn't mention in my previous video. On February 17th, 2015, Square Enix Collective announced that they'd allow independent developers the chance to work on a selection of their purchased Eidos intellectual properties, which included Gex and Fear Effect. A small studio called Sushi Games would pitch and win the opportunity to work on the Fear Effect franchise, but in 2018 posted some concept art of a potential Gex pitch, with Gex looking dramatically redesigned. This was literally the only thing Sushi Games shared about their abandoned Gex plans. I don't think they're still in operation, so not only will this Gex plan never come to fruition, but I doubt we'll ever hear anything more about it either. A commercial for Geico Insurance released recently showing Geico's gecko mascot in the world of Cuphead. This is great news because the chance of someone making a Gex mod for Cuphead just in time for Cuphead's DLC has gone up dramatically. All we need is for someone to rip the gecko from the ad frame by frame, hand draw some extra animations and add some voice clips with a mod to select your favourite voice actor. That's not too much to ask, is it? In a massive Notice Me Senpai moment, Gex gets referenced in Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time. In one of the flashback puzzle rooms, which takes place prior to the first Crash Bandicoot game, Dr. Neo Cortex makes a sly reference to Gex, alongside Sonic and Bubsy. Have a listen.
Maybe next time I'll try a hedgehog, or a bobcat, or a gecko.
Alongside all of the games that I mentioned at the start of the video, I've since found out that Gex also appeared in Lara Croft's Party Poker, an old Java phone game from 2008. Also in the game are the likes of Agent 47 from Hitman and Lara Croft herself. I wonder if Gex made a pass at Lara at her poker party. It wouldn't surprise me. A little one-page Gex manga has surfaced online, scanned from an old Japanese 3DO magazine. In the short comic, Gex buys some snacks for a couch potato day. He gets sucked into his TV and introduces the audience to his trusty tail. Gex ends up throwing up in the final panel after eating a wasabi-flavoured fly. And finally, in the past few months, Square Enix has filed a trademark for Gex in both Europe and Japan, which offers a glimmer of hope that Gex could make a comeback. What's more likely, a remastered trilogy of the older games or a brand spanking new one? Who knows, but I'd be excited with either, quite frankly. If KO the Kangaroo can make a comeback, so can Gex. And there we have it. 2022 really is the year of the Gecko. We've had Gex Jr. Next stop, a proper Gex 4, please. At this point, I'd like to extend a massive thanks to Neal Bauer once again for fielding my questions and sharing his fascinating story. I'd also like to thank enthusiastic Gex fans like Roy Teal and Retrofuge, who have shared some information about Gex Jr. with the wider internet too on the Gex wiki. Thanks guys! A massive thank you to Luiz Díaz as well. He let me use his awesome Gex Jr. art in my thumbnail, thanks a lot for that. That just about wraps things up. Please do share your hopes and dreams for a future Gex game with me in the comments. Thanks for watching and hopefully I'll see you next time.